Hello students, I want to spend a minute introducing you to the next reading. It's a little longer than some that we've already read. It's not terribly long, but it is the first book of a very long poem by a Roman by the name of Lucretius. The Latin name is De Rerum Natura, which means on the nature of things. Before the page that has the PDF, there's a page that introduces the poem to you. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to at least watch the 5-minute video, which is near the bottom of that page. And that's by Stephen Greenblatt. He is a world-renowned scholar, particularly probably the most knowledgeable scholar in the world on Shakespeare. But he is talking about this book, De Rerum Natura, that was in circulation first century of the modern era, no, actually first century BCE, and then with the sort of decline of ancient civilization, things that happened when the Vandals and the Goths came down and sacked Rome, a lot of that knowledge, a lot of that learning was lost. And so this particular book stayed lost for like 1400 years and then was rediscovered. And so Stephen Greenblatt does a wonderful job of explaining the significance of this book. And so if you recall, there was a video in class called the Pre-Socratics. And in that, I went through several of the people who were contemporaries of Socrates around 300, 400 BCE, many of whom had different theories of the world. It was made entirely out of fire. It was made out of, the four elements, etc. And it turns out one of those pre-Socratics, Democritus, was a guy who had ideas about atoms and atomism. And then there was another one, Epicurus, who took the ideas of Democritus and expanded them into an entire philosophy. So Lucretius is 300 or 400 years after that, and he's a Roman. He reads Greek, he reads Latin, and he writes this long poem. So it's like, well, why put it in the form of a long poem? Well, that was a tradition that things that were of great value, things that were important, were put in the form of epic poems. So you get Homer writing the Iliad and the Odyssey. You have a contemporary of Lucretius by the name of Virgil, who writes the Aeneid, which is the poem of the founding of Rome. So important things that people wanted to have remembered were often put in the form of poems. So he writes this 700-line poem in which he, Lucretius, is recounting the philosophy of Epicurus and the atomism of Democritus. So as he's going through, part of what he's doing is he's pointing to those other pre-Socratics and say, this person thought this, but he was wrong because of that. So as you read it, just try and keep in mind that that's what this guy is doing. He's trying to present an argument for a certain kind of view of the world. And it happens to be a very materialistic view of the world. And as a consequence, if it's materialistic, it is not sort of supernatural or spiritual. There are two things early that you might, in order to understand them, you need to know. Memmius is this guy's patron, right? So when he mentions Memmius, he's talking to the guy who would have been the one who sort of financed the poem. He starts the poem with an invocation to his muse, who is the goddess Venus, right? So this is Rome before the current era. So we don't yet have Christ. We don't yet have Christians. We have Jews. We have a variety of polytheistic pagans. The ancient Romans had a whole collection of gods, which were almost the same as the Greek collection of gods. They had different names, but each one of them had a god of the sun, a god of the sea, a god of the moon, a god of the hunt, a god of the wine, a god of this and that, etc. So that's the context in which Lucretius is writing about nature, as opposed to these what the Theologoi wrote, the sort of God-based accounts. And then the other thing is there's a mention of Iphigenia. And so there's a little note there in the introduction to De Rerum Natura. Iphigenia is the daughter of one of the kings who is going to go sail to Troy to fight the Trojans. And they can't get a favorable wind. So a priest says, you got to sacrifice your daughter in order to get a favorable wind to go off and fight this war. And so he does that. And so Lucretius gives that an example of this is the kind of thing that happens when people believe in religion as opposed to believing in nature. All right, I hope that's enough to get you started. See you in class on Monday. And meanwhile, I will respond to the enthymemes that you created so that you get a little feedback on them. Talk to you later.